Thank you, Ralph, and good morning, everyone. Ian also mentioned that BHP didn't see this real peak in the cycle coming, and Rio obviously was the same. And in fact, when I was offered this role back in September 2003, the CEO said to me, well, it's actually a sunset role. It'll probably go to about 2005. So I think not only did we not see it coming, but we certainly didn't see it sustaining the way it has. And I'm not sure where the sun is at the moment, but it's a long, long way away from setting. We have a very exciting journey ahead of us with many challenges. In terms of our challenges going forward, obviously, as I said, I don't see the sun setting for a long time. The demand picture is very strong, and we've got India coming on the back of China, as has already been mentioned. Cost is one of our huge challenges, both in an operating sense and in a construction sense. Many of the materials we use have escalated more than 100% over these last 3 or 4 years, and that presents considerable challenge in the way we manage that cost. Community expectations, obviously our own Rio Tinto communities, but also Indigenous communities. Particularly, I think when you look at the Indigenous communities, they're probably worse off than what they were when we first started in the Pilbara 40 years ago. And we've got a lot of work to do on that front, and certainly increasing the level of employment of Indigenous people is something that we, like BHP, are actively engaged with, not only in our operations, but certainly in getting our contractors to increase the level of Indigenous employment. Education and health are obviously key other factors in improving the welfare of Aboriginal people in the Pilbara. Ian's gone to some length to talk about the skills shortages. It's a big challenge right across the board. It's a very different picture to when geologists were driving taxis not that long ago. And this will be an ongoing challenge for us for a considerable period of time. Material shortages are also a challenge. The lead time on a lot of the things we procure have typically gone from, say, 12 months to 24 months and even longer. So procurement planning is one of the key challenges that we have, and one of the key competences we need in our business. Regulatory approvals are a constant challenge in a timeline when you're trying to expand rapidly. The Western Australian government is obviously struggling to keep pace with resource development in this state, and that's not necessarily a criticism, because they, like us, could not see this coming, and they're short of people, and we, the mining industry, are putting enormous pressure on the state government. They're doing their best to cope with that, but it will be an ongoing challenge for all of us in the mining industry. We're continuing to invest rapidly to meet this global demand for iron ore, and I'll talk a bit more about that. Just quickly, Rio Tinto Iron Ore comprises operations and projects across 5 continents. We provide about a quarter of the world's seaborne iron ore trade, and we're roughly, depending on which measure you use, about a third of Rio Tinto in terms of earnings and assets. There are a number of operating units in all of that. Hamersley Iron and Robe, that you're familiar with in the Pilbara, the Iron Ore Company of Canada, High Smelt down in Kwinana, rapidly ramping up down there, and also Rio Tinto Brazil, which manages a small lump producing ore body called Corumba. Pilbara Iron runs the operations for Robe and Hamersley in the Pilbara, and expansion projects, as Ralph said, has an accountability to both Robe and Hamersley from resource development, long-term mine planning, through the various studies that we do, from conceptual order of magnitude right through to feasibility, and then when projects are approved, be they expansion or replacement by the Rio Tinto board, we take them into construction and ultimately hand them over steady state to our operations. I haven't got too much on the market, and you've really seen this already, but looking back on Chinese iron ore imports on that slide in the left, if you go back to the start of the decade to where they were, well below 100 million tonnes, to where they are, say, today, a rapid expansion, and where most people project China to go with further urbanisation and consumer demand, the outlook is for very strong growth in Chinese iron ore demand. The slide on the right replicates what Ian was talking about. If you look at the developed countries to the right of that slide, where they are in terms of GDP per capita, and if you like on the declining part of the steel intensity curve, to where you see Korea right at the peak. Korea is obviously a strong exporting country. And then you come down to China, where China is, and if you look at China, it's moved from where India is today. So the China story has a long way to go, but equally the point of inflection for India is not far away either. And as India comes rapidly up that curve, it has significant implications for us as an iron ore exporter. India is a major iron ore exporting country. Certainly it's capitalised on the China boom. And as their steel industry grows, a lot of that domestic iron ore will be required for the local steel industry. Looking at what we've been doing, the bar chart on the right shows the growth of Rio Tinto iron ore production, including IOC and Corumba. So it's a pretty rapid growth picture, and that's got a long way to go yet as we move through 200 million tonnes. We have a very integrated production system, running 10 mines, a long distance of rail, and 3 shipping terminals. And that really is a production line, a very integrated production line where each part relies on the other part. A bottleneck in one area obviously contributes to total system disappointment. We've put a lot into improving our existing infrastructure as well as expanding the infrastructure. And indeed, perhaps the most challenging construction projects of all are those in the brownfield environments. And like Ian, I spent quite a few years out of Western Australia, and like Ian, when I came back, not only was I disappointed by the state of the housing infrastructure, I was equally disappointed in the state of some of our operating infrastructure. And particularly when you get into old plants like Tom Price, Paraburdoo, Parker Point at Dampier, the challenges of expanding those plants when they're on the bones of their bum, as it were, is a real challenge. And we've met that challenge, and thankfully we're beyond that now and moving more and more into greenfield type expansion. In terms of what the journey has been so far, you can see on that chart in red those projects that have been completed over the last 5 or 6 years. The most recent has been the expansion of the Antikagina mine to 52 million tonnes per annum. We're just commissioning the reclaimer and train loadout for that project at this current time, but it's been producing since May and is now ready to go to full production rate. The Dampier Port Phase B, which takes Dampier shipping capacity to 140 million tonnes per annum at Parker Point, is rapidly nearing conclusion. The last tie-in of equipment is happening as we speak, and that project will then go into its final phases, and full production will be underway before the end of the year. Hope Downs, the first stage of Hope Downs, is also drawing to a conclusion. We're about 3 or 4 months from finishing that project, and we should have first ore out of the first phase of Hope Downs before the end of the year. And indeed, we've now moved on with the second phase of Hope Downs, recently approved project, which takes our total commitment well beyond $5 billion. But it's at the early stage now and will be in production over the next 18 months. The Cape Lambert upgrade, a significant upgrade of the Cape Lambert port, taking its capacity to 80 million tonnes per annum. It's early days really still with that yet. That project won't be complete till early 2009. at which stage the total shipping capacity for our operations will be 220 million tonnes per annum. Importantly, one needs a resource and reserve base. Churning through these tonnes as we are today, it's absolutely critical to have a large resource base. And when you look at that drilling slide on the right, it perhaps reflects what we've been talking about how organisations like ours failed to really pick this boom coming. When you look at the sort of 100,000 metres drilled in those early years of the decade, there's a clear sign there that we did not understand what was coming. And we've rapidly escalated that level of drilling through 300, 400, up to 500,000 metres that we are doing today. And that is a plan that will take us forward for a number of years yet, that level of drilling, to sustain not only a 220 million tonne per annum rate, but something in excess of 300 million tonnes per annum. Keeping our reserve base ahead of those expansions goes without saying, is absolutely critical for the well-being of our business and what our shareholders and investors would expect of us. Once we reach 220 million tonnes per annum in early 2009, that's not the end of the story. And we already have a pre-feasibility study underway into taking that another 100 million tonnes per annum further. Clearly, the market is demanding that Rio Tinto and BHP undertake these expansions. Our projections going forward are very robust, and the market, for once, is really no longer the question, as it was perhaps in the past. The market's there. It's a question of our ability to meet that market. The studies that we have underway obviously need to look right across the broad spectrum of work that we do, from understanding our customers' requirements to looking at the various mine options that we've got, the rail, power and port infrastructure necessary to support that. Having a deep understanding of our ore bodies is also critical. When one is producing at these rates, there is a risk that a lack of ore body knowledge will lead to the wrong decisions, the wrong plant, the wrong mining regime. So understanding ore body knowledge is absolutely critical. And the social challenge that we have. Our businesses grew up as residential businesses. They've now moved more and more to FIFO. And that's a trend that seems to be embraced not just by the companies, but also by the people that work for us, voting with their feet, as it were, to reside in places like Perth, the southwest, or indeed in fact even on the east coast of Australia. I see that technology, automation, remote operation is going to be a critical part of dealing with these issues of housing, accommodation, skill shortage, etc. going forward. And we're putting a lot of effort at Rio Tinto into automation and remote operation. Many of you will be aware that we have automated train operator trials going on at the moment in the Pilbara. And there are many pieces of kit and many processes that we can seek to automate beyond what we're currently doing. And certainly remote operation technology is proven. And the challenge may not necessarily be in the technology, but more in the people issues, the HR issues that will go with changing the way we do our business. But nevertheless, I think the requirement for us to keep towns in the Pilbara to a standard that will attract people to the Pilbara is a challenge that we also understand and are very keen to meet as we go forward. 320 is a target that we're setting ourselves. Whether it turns out to be 300, 310, 320, 330, we're not sure yet, but that's the target we're setting ourselves, which requires obviously an additional 100 million tonnes per annum of port capacity. It will require a number of new mines to be brought on. And indeed, at these rates of production, no matter where the final ceiling is reached, we will need to be bringing on new mines constantly as we go forward. When I look at the next decade going forward for our business, I'm sure that in any 1 year, Rio Tinto will be building a new mine, if only for replacement and not expansion. Obviously, we also have significant expansion required in rail power, and water is also a key issue that we should never underestimate. Obviously, the Pilbara is pretty green at the moment and has been for a few years since the cyclones that we've had in that time. But if you go back a few years ago, things were pretty dry and water was pretty short and things were fairly desperate. And I'm sure we'll meet that situation again in the future. So planning for water is a key aspect of our business as well. Moving on to some of our non-Pilbara businesses or projects. We, like many others, have been trying to crack the India situation. We've been in India in a joint venture with the Orissa state government for 10 years or so to try and bring on some deposits in Orissa state. India's not the easiest country to do business with, although I believe it's a country of enormous potential, and we're quite keen to stay the journey there. And when you look at the potential growth they've got, as I said, in servicing their growing steel industry, the demand for iron ore in India will go up rapidly. There's a lot of iron ore in India. It's a very prospective country for iron ore. There are some large deposits not yet developed, but it is a challenge, and it's a challenge we wish to take on and stay the journey. Corumba, I don't know why all these wonderful ore bodies are in the wrong part of the world or in a long distance inland, but you can see from that map where Corumba resides on the Bolivian border, and it's a very attractive ore body because it produces high-grade lump ore, but the location and the logistics present some very unique challenges. Transporting ore by barge convoys is not what we're quite used to in the Pilbara, and transporting it 2,500 kilometres is a hell of a challenge. Most of Corumba's production at the current time is sold to Argentina down the Paraguay River. As you can see, it's a small production at the moment, only 2 million tonnes, but the resource is considerable. So we are looking at expanding it in a first phase to 7.5 million tonnes per annum, and that's in feasibility study at the current time. And we also have plans, order of magnitude plans, to take production to 15 million tonnes per annum. And we have had various discussions with politicians about the potential for the creation of a steel centre or an iron centre in that part of Brazil. Obviously there's lots of gas there and no shortage of high-grade iron ore. Moving on to Simandou. Simandou also is a very large high-grade resource, again not necessarily located in the easiest spot to get to. From the drilling we've done so far, and we've been there now for 10 years, albeit our drilling is really only ramping up as we speak, there is sort of no doubt about the potential of Simandou. It's just a question of how big it will turn out to be. The mining concession was granted last year, and we now have the opportunity to move forward with IFC taking a 5% stake in the project. We've built up a strong pre-feasibility team, getting more people on the ground. There's no doubt it's a very difficult country to operate in, a very poor country. It lacks infrastructure. There are many challenges in terms of getting people and plant and equipment into the place. You can see from its location that it's a long way from the coast of Guinea. If you take where Conakry is, the capital, We'll be constructing a port somewhere 60 k's south of that, towards the Sierra Leone border. So the rail distance from the ore bodies to that port site is something like about 700 kilometres, and considerable challenge comes with that. We have done a lot of work on the ground there. I think the relationships with the people are good. Our relationships with the Ghanaian government are good, and this project has enormous potential for our organisation, and we're committing a lot of effort to it. And in ending this presentation, I've got an animation.
The Simandou project is approximately 540 kilometres east-southeast of Guinea's capital, Conakry. Rio Tinto started grassroots exploration in 1996 and has brought the project to its current state as a pre-feasibility study. The present plan is to transport iron ore from the Simandou mining concession, shown here in red, to a greenfields port to be built about 60 kilometres to the south of Conakry. The Simandou mining concession is 110 kilometres long by about 7 kilometres wide and was granted to Rio Tinto Iron Ore, RTIO, in March 2006. A high-resolution aeromagnetic survey reveals the more magnetic rocks, typically iron formation or itabarite as they're known locally. Initial prospecting started in the north, close to Kerouane. Geological work since then has mapped areas of surface hematite, shown in pink, which will be tested over the coming years. Also of potential interest are detrital deposits, or kangas, flanking the ridge, shown here in lighter pink. The Pic de Font and Hueleba zones form the resources for the pre-feasibility base case. A 70 million tonne per year operation with a 30-year mine life, requiring some 2.1 billion tonnes of recoverable iron ore. We can see existing drill holes with high-grade hematite shown as a red wireframe surface. The next zone to the north is Hueleba, where mineralisation has been mapped over 7.5 kilometres. Like any geological prospect in its early stages, Hueleba still requires a substantial amount of further work. The current proposal will bring Pic de Font and Hueleba to PFS level by early 2008, requiring 8 rigs and a crew of 150 people on site. This shows the final pit shapes. The primary crusher and the 4.5 kilometre conveyor to the Hueleba loadout, capable of handling 35 million tonnes per year. The loadout for the Pic de Font resource will be fed by an 8-kilometre conveyor. The proposal to locate the infrastructure on the western side of the range requires further environmental assessment, as agreed with the IFC and RTIO's NGO partners. A new 300-person camp is scheduled for completion in early 2008. Part of the current early works programme is to build a laterite airstrip close to Baila, about 40 kilometres from Kanga East. The airstrip will reduce travel time from Conakry from the current 2.5 days to 3 hours. This overview shows possible locations for the main waste dumps and the other planned mine infrastructure. Iron ore will be transported from mine to port entirely within Guinea by a new standard gauge heavy-haul dedicated iron ore railway. The route has been chosen to minimise environmental impacts and to avoid population centres. Resettlement, compensation, personal disturbance and environmental factors will be key deliverables of the PFS. The most challenging portion of the rail construction will be a 150-kilometre long stretch through the mountainous terrain to the south of Mamou. Travel time is estimated at 36 hours to deliver 70 million tonnes per year after a 6-year ramp-up, currently planned for start-up at the end of 2013. At Point Yelliotono, ore will be discharged and processed into lump and fines products. An initial service wharf will allow early importing of equipment and fuel for construction. Final location for the port is subject to the results of the planned social and environmental baseline studies and a bathymetric survey. 2 bucket wheel reclaimers will move the ore from the stockpiles onto a conveyor belt along a 17-kilometre causeway to reach the 18-metre water contour. A channel and turnout slot will be dredged to 20 metres depth with berthing capacity for 2 Cape-sized vessels. RTIO will be studying the potential for this to become a multi-user port as part of its ongoing commitment to sustainable regional development in Guinea.
I think in concluding, when you look at a project like that, you think of the Pilbara in the 60s, you think of Carajás in the 80s, and it's a great challenge, but one I'm sure that will have great rewards. And I see production coming out of Simandou, a high-grade production coming out of Simandou, as a wonderful complement to the ongoing production from the Pilbara. Probably a good way to go into coffee, I think, Ralph, but thank you very much, and I hope you have a great conference.